The room buzzed with conversation, the clinking of glasses and soft hum of music filling the grand hall. It was a high-profile charity event in New York City, a place where politicians, business leaders, and celebrities mingled under chandeliers, exchanging polite laughter and handshakes. Barron Trump had attended events like this before, but he never sought attention. He carried himself with quiet confidence, nodding politely when greeted, keeping his interactions brief but respectful. He had just stepped away from a conversation when he noticed a group of young men nearby, their hushed voices carrying a tone that was unmistakable. It wasn't admiration, it was mockery. "Look at him," one of them muttered, just loud enough for others to hear. "Must be nice to have everything handed to you." Barron didn't react. He'd learned long ago that people loved to assume things about him. It came with the name, the background, the expectations. He wasn't surprised. He had seen it before, felt it in the way some people looked at him. Another voice, a little louder this time with a chuckle behind it. "Bet he can't even hold a conversation without a script." A couple of them laughed, their eyes flickering toward him, waiting for a reaction. The energy in the space shifted slightly. A few guests nearby noticed the exchange, their conversations slowing as they watched from the corners of their eyes. Barron exhaled slowly. He could have ignored it, walked away like it hadn't happened, but something in him told him to do otherwise. So, instead, he turned. He didn't rush, didn't make a scene. He simply walked toward them, his posture relaxed, his expression unreadable. The group fell silent for a moment, their laughter fading. They hadn't expected this. Barron stopped just a step away, looking at them with the same calm gaze he had mastered over the years. He let the moment breathe, let the weight of his presence settle. Then, in a voice that was steady, deliberate, and without an ounce of hesitation, he spoke. "You seem to have a lot to say about me," he said, his tone level. "Want to say it to my face?" The group stiffened slightly. The air in the room felt heavier, and just like that, the dynamic had changed. The smirks on their faces faltered for just a second, but it was enough. They hadn't expected him to walk over, to look them in the eye, to call them out without raising his voice. The leader of the group, a guy with slicked-back hair and a confidence built on an audience, recovered first. He tilted his head, his grin returning, though it wasn't as sure as before. "Relax, man," he said, stuffing his hands into his pockets. "We were just talking." Barron didn't move, didn't blink. "Yeah," he said, his voice calm. "And now I'm here, so go ahead." The guy chuckled, shifting slightly as a few of his friends glanced at each other. They had been in control of the conversation when he wasn't in it, when he was just someone to whisper about. But now, standing right in front of them, unfazed, he wasn't playing into their game. He wasn't angry, he wasn't defensive, he was just there. The second guy, the one who had made the crack about a script, cleared his throat. "We just think it must be nice, that's all," he said with a shrug, "not having to work for anything. Knowing your last name does all the heavy lifting." Barron tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "You think you know me?" The guy smirked. "Don't have to, it's pretty obvious." Barron exhaled through his nose, something almost like amusement flickering in his eyes. "Right," he said, "because you've had long conversations with me. You've seen how I live, the things I've worked at, the things I've failed at." The leader scoffed, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "Come on, man, we're just messing with you." Barron's gaze didn't waver. "No, you're not," he said, his voice still steady. "You're trying to make yourself feel bigger by making me smaller." The group fell silent. A few people nearby were watching now, their quiet conversations forgotten. Barron let the moment breathe. He wasn't trying to win. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He was just standing there, completely in control, while the ones who had tried to pull him down suddenly found themselves looking up. "You don't have to like me," Barron finally said. "But ask yourself, if I'm really what you think I am, why are you so desperate to bring me down?" No one had an answer. The group shifted uncomfortably, their confidence cracking under the weight of Barron's words. The leader, the one who had started it all, forced a smirk, but it didn't quite reach his eyes this time. He wasn't used to this, being called out without being insulted, being faced with someone who didn't react the way he expected. One of his friends cleared his throat. "Man, we were just joking. You don't have to take everything so seriously." Barron didn't flinch. "If it was just a joke, why does it only work when I'm not supposed to respond?" The guy hesitated. Someone in the crowd let out a quiet, as if they had just realized the same thing. A couple of guests nearby were watching more openly now, their conversations forgotten. The leader ran a hand through his hair, exhaling. "All right, fine," he muttered. "You handled that pretty well." Barron's expression remained steady. He wasn't looking for approval. He didn't need their validation. He had just wanted them to think. The younger guy, the one who had been laughing the loudest before, suddenly seemed smaller. His gaze flickered downward for a second before he glanced back up. "So, what, you're just going to walk away now?" Barron studied him for a moment, then shrugged. "What else is there to say?" The leader crossed his arms. "You don't want to fire back? Say something about us?" Barron let out a quiet breath, not laughing, but something close to it. "You're waiting for that, aren't you?" The group stayed silent. He nodded slightly. "You wanted me to get mad. You wanted me to say something dumb so you could feel like you won." The leader looked away, jaw tightening slightly. The younger one bit his lip. Barron took a step back, his posture as relaxed as when he had walked over. "You don't get to decide who I am," he said, his tone even. "And I don't need to prove anything to you." Then, just like that, he turned and walked away. Not in a rush, not as if he was retreating, just leaving the conversation exactly where it was. The group stood there, watching him go, realizing that somehow, without raising his voice, without saying a single insult, he had just done something they couldn't. He had walked away with respect intact, and they had none. The air in the room had shifted. The quiet hum of conversations that had been interrupted by the exchange slowly picked back up, but not entirely. People had noticed what happened. Some still whispered, exchanging glances, while others just shook their heads, as if surprised by how it all played out. Barron didn't look back as he walked away. He didn't need to. He knew what had just happened. He had felt the change in their body language, the way their laughter had died down, not because they had lost an argument, but because there wasn't one. He had given them nothing to twist, nothing to fight back against. A few guests approached him as he made his way toward the other side of the room. A man in his 50s, wearing a tailored suit and holding a half-full glass of champagne, gave a small nod. "Handled that well, son." Barron nodded in return, offering only a polite, "Thanks." He wasn't looking for validation. He had just done what felt right. From across the room, the group of guys stood in a loose circle, talking in lower voices now. The leader's smirk had faded completely, his arms crossed over his chest. One of them, the youngest, shook his head and muttered something, glancing toward Barron as if seeing him differently. The people who had expected a reaction, a confrontation, or some dramatic moment were left with something entirely unexpected. There had been no insults, no anger, just a quiet shift of power. And somehow, that had been louder than any argument could have been. Barron picked up a glass of water from a passing tray and took a sip. Across the room, he caught the eyes of one of the men who had laughed at him earlier. The guy hesitated, then quickly looked away, pretending to focus on something else. It wasn't about intimidation. It wasn't about winning. It was about control. Barron had kept his. They had lost theirs. A woman in her 40s, elegantly dressed, leaned toward a companion. "That was impressive," she murmured, nodding toward Barron. "You don't see that kind of composure often." The other person, a man in a navy suit, glanced toward the group of bullies, who were now noticeably quieter. He smirked slightly. "They expected to humiliate him," he said. "Instead, they embarrassed themselves." Barron stepped outside for a moment. The cool night air a welcome contrast to the warmth of the event hall. The city lights stretched out in front of him, the hum of distant traffic filling the quiet space. He wasn't shaken. If anything, he felt lighter, like he had walked through something meant to break him and come out the other side untouched. A few feet away, leaning against the stone railing of the balcony, was one of the guys from the group, the youngest one, the one who had laughed the hardest at first, but had stayed the quietest in the end. He wasn't smirking now. He was staring down at his hands, absent-mindedly fidgeting with the edge of his jacket sleeve. Barron debated walking past him. He had nothing to prove, nothing to say, but something made him stop. "You good?" Barron asked, his voice even. The guy looked up, startled. He hadn't expected Barron to speak to him, let alone acknowledge him after what had happened. He blinked, then let out a breath, shaking his head slightly. "Yeah, I guess." Barron leaned against the railing a few feet away, giving him space. The guy hesitated before speaking again. "Look, man, about earlier." He rubbed the back of his neck, glancing away. "We were just messing around." Barron nodded, his expression unreadable. "I know." Silence stretched between them. It wasn't tense, but it carried weight. The guy exhaled sharply, glancing at Barron. "You didn't react how I thought you would." Barron smirked slightly, looking out at the skyline. "Disappointed?" The guy let out a small chuckle, shaking his head. "Nah, I don't know. You didn't get mad. You didn't try to make us look stupid." Barron turned to him now, meeting his gaze. "I didn't have to." The guy swallowed, nodding slowly, as if finally understanding something. He shoved his hands into his pockets, looking down again. "You're not what I thought you'd be." Barron shrugged. "Most people aren't." The door behind them opened, the sounds of the event filtering through. The guy straightened, giving a quick nod. "Anyway, my bad." Barron studied him for a moment before responding. "No worries." And somehow, in that simple exchange, something had shifted. The guy lingered for a second longer, shifting his weight from one foot to the other as if debating whether to say something else. Barron didn't press him. He had seen this before, someone realizing, maybe for the first time, that they had been wrong about a person they never really knew. It wasn't easy to admit, even in silence. A gust of wind passed between them, rustling the edge of their jackets. The city stretched out below, headlights moving in slow streams through the streets. It was the kind of moment where words weren't necessary, where something unspoken had already settled. Finally, the guy let out a breath, giving a small shake of his head. "You probably think I'm an idiot." Barron arched an eyebrow. "Why?" He gave a half-hearted chuckle. "For the way we acted back there, for trying to get a reaction out of you." Barron considered that, then shrugged. "I don't think you're an idiot." He let a pause stretch before adding, "I think you're just trying to figure yourself out." The guy frowned slightly, caught off guard. He wasn't used to people seeing past the surface. "What makes you say that?" Barron turned back to the city, watching the distant lights. "People who are sure of themselves don't need to tear others down." The words hung in the air. The guy swallowed, looking down at his shoes. He wasn't defensive anymore. He wasn't making excuses. He was just quiet, thinking. After a long beat, he muttered, "Yeah, maybe." Barron didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. He knew that this wasn't about him anymore. This was about the guy standing next to him, finally looking inward instead of outward. The sound of the event behind them drifted through the open doorway. Glasses clinking, muffled conversation, polite laughter. The guy glanced back toward it, then at Barron. "I should get back." Barron nodded. "See you around." The guy hesitated, then extended a hand. It wasn't forced, wasn't for show, just a simple, genuine gesture. Barron took it. A firm shake, no tension. As the guy walked back inside, Barron stayed where he was, hands in his pockets, exhaling as he looked out over the skyline. Some people never changed, but some did. And sometimes all it took was one moment. Barron eventually made his way back inside, the warmth of the venue a stark contrast to the crisp night air. Conversations had resumed, laughter and clinking glasses filling the space once again. But something was different. As he stepped into the crowd, he felt the occasional glance in his direction, not the kind he was used to, not the empty curiosity or assumptions that usually followed his name. These looks carried something else. Recognition, maybe even respect. Near the bar, a man in his 40s, dressed in a sharp navy suit, nodded at him as he passed. "Class act, kid," he murmured. Barron didn't break stride. He just returned the nod, taking it in without needing to respond. Further into the room, the group that had started it all had scattered. A few were still together, quieter now, less confident than before. They weren't laughing anymore, weren't whispering like they had been earlier. If anything, they looked like they were still processing what had happened. The leader, the one who had smirked the most, was standing near the back of the room, staring at his phone, but Barron could tell he wasn't really reading whatever was on the screen. His shoulders were stiff, his jaw clenched, not with anger, but with something else. Embarrassment, maybe even regret. One of the guys nudged him, whispering something, but the leader just shook his head, as if brushing it off. Barron could tell, though, this wasn't how they had expected things to go. A few feet away, the younger one, the one from outside, stood alone, looking around as if he wasn't quite sure where he fit anymore. Barron met his gaze briefly, and this time the guy didn't look away. He gave a small nod. Barron returned it. No words were needed. The moment had already said everything. As Barron moved through the crowd, someone else stopped him. An older woman, elegant but kind-eyed. "You remind me of your mother," she said softly, a warm smile touching her lips. Dignified, graceful. Barron simply smiled back. "Thank you." The event carried on, the incident fading into the background, but the feeling remained. Barron hadn't just handled the situation, he had changed it, and everyone in that room knew it. Barron moved through the event with the same quiet confidence he had arrived with, but something was different now. He could feel it in the way people looked at him, not as someone defined by his last name, not as just another high-profile guest, but as a person who had just shown exactly who he was. He didn't need validation. He had never lived for applause. But even he could recognize that tonight had shifted something, not just for him, but for the people who had been watching. At one of the tables near the exit, a couple of young professionals whispered among themselves. One of them, a man in his early 30s, leaned back in his chair, shaking his head slightly. "I'll be honest," he said to his friend. "I had a whole different idea of what he'd be like." The friend nodded. "Yeah, same." Barron didn't hear the exchange, but he didn't need to. He had done what he came to do: attend the event, carry himself with dignity, and without meaning to, change the minds of people who had already decided who he was before ever speaking to him. As he reached the door, he glanced back once. The group of bullies was still there, but different now, quieter, more thoughtful. The leader, the one who had thrown the first jab, was no longer laughing. He stood with his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. Maybe he would forget this night by tomorrow. Maybe he wouldn't. The younger guy, the one who had met Barron outside, caught his eye again. This time, it wasn't just a nod. It was something more, an acknowledgement. Barron gave the slightest smile before pushing open the door and stepping outside. The cool air hit his face as he walked toward the car waiting at the curb. As he climbed in, the driver glanced at him through the mirror. "Good event?" Barron exhaled, looking out the window as the city lights blurred past. "Yeah," he said simply. He didn't need to explain. He didn't need to talk about what had happened, because in the end, the lesson had already been taught. Not with anger, not with insults, but with composure. And sometimes that was the most powerful response of all. Barron stepped outside once again, the city lights stretching endlessly before him. The air was quieter now, the weight of the evening settling into his mind. He had walked into that event just another name people whispered about, but he was walking out as something more, someone they had seen for themselves, not through headlines or assumptions, but through his actions. He had nothing to prove, yet somehow he had proven everything. As he reached the curb, his driver opened the door, but Barron paused for a moment, glancing back at the building. Inside, the night carried on. Conversations continued, but some people, maybe just a handful, had walked away different than before, and that mattered. The guy from earlier, the one who had started as a stranger and ended up as something else, stood near the doorway, watching him leave. He didn't wave, didn't try to speak, but his expression was softer now, more thoughtful. Barron gave him a small nod before stepping into the car. The door shut with a quiet click, sealing away the noise of the city. As the car pulled away, he exhaled slowly, resting his elbow against the window. Some battles weren't fought with fists. Some were won with nothing more than composure, patience, and the understanding that true strength wasn't about breaking someone down. It was about refusing to be pulled down with them. And that was the kind of strength no one could take away. We live in a world where people will judge us before they know us, where assumptions speak louder than truth. But the real power lies not in proving people wrong with anger, but in showing them who you are without ever needing to fight. When someone tries to bring you down, don't meet them at their level. Rise above, stay steady, be the person they didn't expect, the one who walks away with their dignity intact. Because respect isn't something you demand, it's something you earn. And sometimes the strongest response is simply refusing to be shaken.